Founder of MapQuest and current CEO and founder of Local Matters, Perry Evans. Great.
Thanks. I think I've spent a fair amount of time over the last 10 or 12 years, more on the mapping side and more on the customer application side with MapQuest and then Jabber, and most recently Local Matters. And the question mark is, I'm not going to tell you what I'm working on next, because that's not to be revealed quite yet. But I'm in the process of the next one. But a lot of what I've learned over the last decade is really that there's a lot of disconnects, if you will, between the promise of a great application for the consumer and the advertising opportunity from the local business. And having spent a good chunk of the last 5 years especially helping large directory publishers scale up their success with local advertisers, I thought it would be a good chance to kind of share some of that challenge on the evolution of what's happening in local advertising in support of an incredible factory of great ideas and new consumer opportunities. And to start with kind of 3 misconceptions, if you will, that I think LBS companies or startups tend to make when they build their business model and fantasize about the revenue plans behind them. And I characterize them as an obsessive-compulsive disorder around growth. The perception that more and more precision is necessarily better, and something I call the John Battelle syndrome. John's a friend, so I'm saying that in all the right ways. One of the things that I learned a long time ago, and this was from a study that was done in small business advertising segmentation probably 10 or 15 years ago and has been updated in the industry, is that you have to think about small businesses differently than you think about technology companies. There's a focus that we all have where everything is about growth, and the more you can help a business grow, the more money there should be for both sides of the equation. The reality is that small businesses tend to segment themselves naturally around 3 fairly similar size subsegments. There's the businesses who are truly focused on growing their business. There's the businesses who are in a more mature phase and essentially kind of at a plateau and comfortably living a lifestyle that they got into the business for in the first place. And there's a natural selection process or a natural evolution process where that son you thought was going to take over the business isn't, and you'll just wind your way down out of that. So there's a segmentation view of small businesses that I think is really important to have in the back of your head when you think about small businesses. And really that growth is everything thinking is a real misnomer in the small business space. And one of the best ways that it was explained to me once was, keep asking yourself the question, is your product so valuable that it justifies taking my time away from my family? Because at the end of the day, if you're selling to a small business, that's really what the trade-off becomes with new opportunities. So it's a great acid test for me to really say, there's a reason that local advertiser probably isn't using your product, and it really has a lot more to do with what happens in the core motivation of a small business and their dynamic than in the quality of your product. The other kind of key misperception or difference in the way we project is that we always, coming from the kind of the Geo World, the more precise you can get location, the better off we are. The problem that you really have is that the channels that generate 95% of the revenue from small business advertising don't have the same mindset around precision of geography. Yellow Pages use book boundaries as the way they sell advertising, and they're really just starting to migrate out of that model of targeting. Direct marketing uses postal carrier geography, postal walk demographics, and crude DMA and Zip+4 kind of logic around collected groups of consumer activity. And even AdSense, one of the things that I was going to say Ian White's kind of most famous for, he's got lots of rants, I know, but this is one of my favorite ones, is the notion that the auction effect in AdSense actually suppresses precision of geography. And the basic theory there is that if you you will make more money by aggregating 5 advertisers up to a higher level of geography than spreading them down to 5 individually better targeted advertising opportunities because of the competitive effect of an auction model. And my favorite, Craig Newmark, who someone referred to him as the Antichrist of feature and function geeks, which I think is a perfect analogy. If you ever try to talk to Craig about why isn't he putting maps, why doesn't he put more location context into his service, it's just not his DNA. And so if you really look at the ecosystem of what's happening in local advertising, that relentless pursuit of more precision is just not in the DNA of the advertising industry. So even though an SMB, small to medium-sized business, can see the value, if the ecosystem isn't aligned around that and hasn't modified their infrastructure for selling, tracking, and delivering those ads around more precision, it kind of falls apart in terms of you achieving the value return of that greater precision. The other area, everybody, myself included, is infatuated with what's happening in the conversation economy, and I give John Battelle lots of credit for being the poster child evangelist for that, and I know he's very passionate about it. Paul Kudrowski had a great tweet the other day, which I loved, which was, note to social media glue sniffers, I no more want brands to engage with me than I want my plumber to cook me dinner. And I think there's a reality check here, which is basically to say that commercial intrusions and messages from advertisers, no matter how well targeted, are still going to struggle with being pushed into personal and professional conversations. And we've seen that for decades, whether it's around instant messaging or commercial models that are around conversations have yet to be proven as a viable model. So while this concept of a small business engaging in conversational ways with their true local consumer is a really interesting nugget, and I think it has vast potential, at the end of the day, the small business wants leads, but they have little time or comfort with the technology that's moving as fast and has so much kind of hieroglyphics as Twitter does today. So I think that's an exciting ecosystem, but it doesn't feel ready for prime time under its current iteration. The filtering and the applications above it, to me, are prime territory to change that dynamic, but in its raw form today, the small business examples that you hear anecdotally spoken about of Twitter, I think are really at the fringes. So just to put this into a very complicated map, I'll try not to spend too much time on this, but this stuff will be published to give you a better sense. If you go from left to right, I guess, looking at the yellow pages and the aggregator networks and Google's role, that's the search-centric side of the local advertising ecosystem. And this really dominates the landscape today of how small businesses are finding their way to online consumers. One of the things that I think is, for those who aren't that familiar with the Yellow Pages industry, if you look today, AT&T Yellow Pages is doing close to $1 billion annually in local online advertising today. First quarter they hit, I think, 210 million. And are on a trajectory, excuse me, this quarter to hit close to 250. So they're really getting critical mass with their advertisers. I think Verizon Super Pages is probably 35 or 40% of that is my best guess. So you're really getting to about a $2 billion a year ecosystem around. The guys who have the traditional advertiser relationship are finally getting the ecosystem figured out and are building the ad networks that really are more hyper-local, I would argue, than any other ad network. There are 3.5 million small business advertisers that have that traditional relationship with Yellow Pages, and that industry is actually transforming itself, I would argue, away from publishing and more to being a sales channel and an ad network. So if you look at the AT&T proposition, today they're selling into a traffic base in their network of 35 or so million monthly uniques. Probably 20% of that is their own media properties, and the rest is the network effect of them selling into MSN and AOL area guides and sites like that. Then you've got the aggregator networks like Marchex and Local.com and the Reach Locals, who are working in part by taking some traffic and distributing into YP, buying a lot of Google keywords, and basically working as a new intermediary in that ecosystem. On the other side, in the promotion-centric side of the business, a lot of people don't think of promotion as a big part of local advertising today, because small businesses typically don't invest in brand, and people tend to think of display and brand advertising as being more of a national or national-local model. But I think that's changing a little bit. The best case in point of that is what you see with email promotion and Constant Contact being a great poster child of that. They have 250,000 small business users now, all self-serve, and they're generating $100 million in annual revenue from that base of direct email marketing. And on the other side, the jury is still out in terms of the ecosystems of social networks, but Craigslist is a fascinating study, which I'll come back to in a sec. One of the things, just to give you a case in point of who's buying all these local keywords from Google, this was a study just put out by AdQuants over the last few days, and it really articulates the fact that this is a market that is flowing through aggregators and mediators, not direct to small business, that the majority of activity today is coming through a channel of some sort. So the notion of small business self-serve is still a minority instance, not a majority instance. And that's also exemplified by just some of the stats around aggregator positions. When one vendor is getting 10% of the market, you see the dynamics there. So talk a little bit about direct marketing, because I think there's some really interesting shifts going on in the local ad ecosystem around promotion and the real-time web that really captures my imagination. Valpak is the traditional player in this. $260 million in revenue across 70,000 advertisers. Constant Contact I profiled. Did a study recently on Craigslist, and this is outside of all the person-to-person advertising. If you take all the secondary small business placement categories, there's probably 1 to 1.5, probably closer to 1.5 people who advertise at least once a month on Craigslist using a free self-serve service. And then at the traditional end of the chain, the outside automotive, home, and jobs, you have about a $20 billion retail newspaper. We think what's coming, if you will, is that the financial model is moving more towards paying for leads and actions. Historically, these channels would pay you 7, 8, 10, 12 cents per search just for getting a local search and aggregating that up into their network. Those days are shifting, and they're being managed over the next 2 years, I believe, to more of a pay-per-lead, pay-per-action type model. And for that kind of dynamic, think about in your application, the closer you can get to decision-making and the closer you can get to consumption, the more you have value to offer to that equation. And the higher the value of that lead is to the small business, the more value you get out of that transaction. So it's really shifting where the thinking has to shift towards the value opportunity. The businesses also, I think, are getting very savvy to a couple of new technologies that I think are going to be very important for them as services in the next few years. Reputation management. Everybody knows reviews drive or kill business, and that's becoming very much a key part of the situation. The opportunity to match demand and supply, and service and support models that take over the hard work, if you will, for them. And finally, one of the big questions outstanding in this space is really around, will the self-serve channel step up, and can this be built without having to go through these aggregators that in many cases are suppressing demand from the small business but providing the scale that you need? My conclusion is that perhaps it can, and if you look at Craigslist, by the volume of self-publishing models that are working today for over 1 million small businesses, that's a very good proof point. Constant Contact has proven a model of relatively simple support services on a self-serve model. And Twitter, to me, is instigating a scaled infrastructure where you really have the opportunity for low involvement live conversations between consumers and businesses. While that's very early in the sophistication to make that work, I do believe that that concept of live promotion will be one of the most interesting new frontiers, if you will, of connecting consumers and advertisers in more interesting ways. So that's it. Yeah. Thank you.